a creative conservationist and wildlife artist. I'm originally from North Yorkshire and I'm now based in Bristol. And I work freelance as well as for the BBC Natural History Unit in children's TV. And so I work in lots of different media, from film to animation, art and writing. I sort of love being creative, but it's always about the natural world. My degree is in biology, and I also have a master's in wildlife filmmaking, and I just absolutely love art. So I've done lots of different projects. I've been really lucky to work with lots of different organisations and really cool people. I always find it really fun working with others. And so these are some of the people I've worked with over the last few years, being freelance. But what I thought would be particularly interesting would be to actually show you some of my artwork, because I think that that's the most interesting thing. So, the internet is really not enjoying all of the images. It's alright, don't worry. We'll see if they load. But you can use your imagination as they slowly appear. But basically, like, I've been doing art since I can remember. I started drawing, honestly, probably when I was about 3. And I've been a creative conservationist freelance for about 4 years now. So these are some of my pieces, and I work across lots of different media, from inks and biro to charcoal, pencil, watercolour, coffee sometimes, like genuinely whatever I can get my hands on. I love experimenting. And so let's dig into it. So this is one of my most recent pieces. It's based on one of my own photos, and it's looking at African elephants. And so what I said at the start was one of the biggest things that I do is something called wildlife artivism, and I imagine that as a phrase you've not heard before. So hopefully everyone's heard of activism. So artivism is essentially art which is activism, and wildlife artivism is artivism which specialises in the natural world. So the aim is with artivism is that you're going to communicate science with the aim of inciting a change in thought or behaviour, and that's a lot of what I do with my work. And so it can be illustrating a scientific issue, which is going to be some of the pieces I'll show in a second, but it can also be just illustrating species. So this is a kind of bit of both. So elephants, as everyone probably knows, are endangered. They are declining for various reasons, including the ivory trade. And I wanted to show an elephant in a sort of beautiful way, because I've done some pieces looking at the more kind of gory side of the ivory trade, but I wanted to just allude to the fact they're disappearing. So that's why it's kind of fading behind a bush, and it also is why it's quite sort of photorealistic, because I wanted it to look more realistic so you connect with it a bit more. And on that similar vein, this is a Sumatran rhino. So Sumatran rhinos are the kind of lesser known cousin of the white rhino and the black rhino. I don't think they get nearly as much coverage as some of the African rhinos, and so that's why I wanted to illustrate this one. And so this is an example of art where you're just trying to highlight a species to people. So these go out on social media, they go out into kind of physical places, people see them, people interact with them, and it's an awareness of that species that they may not have had before, because art communicates to people regardless of language and like prior experience. You don't need to read a scientific paper to understand what this is. So back to elephants. This is a piece looking at the ivory trade. So the ivory trade is one of the biggest things that affects elephants. Obviously it involves removing their tusks. And I am quite, as I said, like experimenting with things, and I wanted to create a piece of art that really made you think, and so it involved painting myself. When we're thinking of ivory, it's quite an aesthetic thing. Often it's used in jewellery as well as like medicine and stuff. It's for us. And so by painting on myself, I really wanted to highlight that. I also put gold leaf on to accentuate the fact that it's got an aesthetic value, it's got an economic value, and we seem to think that it has more value to us when it's not attached to an elephant than when it's in the tusk. And that's kind of why this piece came to light. And then the way I lit it and stuff was, again, to kind of emphasise that gold value, the idea that it has more economic value when it's not attached to an elephant than when it is. And so this is one of the more recent pieces. It's also the piece I'm probably most excited about at the moment because it's about to go to Mount Galleries in London, which is very cool. Although it's currently on a mission to the Frames. But this is a piece in charcoal. And it's called Charcoal, and it's in charcoal, and it's about charcoal, so it's a very charcoal-focused piece. So this is looking at Californian redwoods, giant redwoods. And as I'm hoping most people know, California has been really wrecked by wildfires in the last few years, and that's mainly due to climate change. And so I wanted to draw attention to this by having a giant redwood on a piece of mapboard that is about yay high, and I wanted to kind of fade it out into smoke and allude to the fact that these are literally being lit apart by climate change. And this is essentially what I did. And by working in charcoal, I really wanted it to kind of be quite a sort of a self-aware piece, I think. And I hope that's what I'll achieve with this piece, but we will see. I think the nicest thing about art is that people can read lots of different things into it. So although some people might read that into it, other people might just see it as a nice tree. And that is equally valid and nice, because as long as I'm introducing some people to a species, that is kind of my job done, really. Okay, there's another whale piece coming up later, but this is a slightly newer version. And this is looking at North Atlantic right whales. Specifically, it's focusing on the calves, so this is a small version, because obviously whales are huge. North Atlantic right whales, as of many cetaceans, are affected by noise pollution, anthropogenic, so human-caused noise pollution in our oceans. And when I was reading a book by another artist called Beatrice Forshaw, called Vanishing Species, she was talking about how they're affected by noise, and it causes hemorrhagic bleeding within inside them, basically. And this is particularly harmful for the calves because they get separated from their mothers, and they wash up on shore, and then they bleed to death. It's horrible, I'm sorry, it's not a nice thing to kind of reflect on in an evening. But I wanted to draw attention to this in a way which was kind of a little bit more palatable for people, but still kind of drawing attention to it in a shocking way. And so these are kind of the noise waves for when the whale is singing and communicating, and the red splodges are the idea that it's hemorrhaging and it's breaking apart in a really sort of very visual, visceral way, I think. But this bit here, these little white things are not just a mistake. They are actually the kind of rays of hope. So as well as water, when it filters through water, I wanted to have that kind of feeling of being underwater, also that idea of hope, the fact that it's not just doom and gloom for these whales, there is something that we can do about it. And so I think when I'm creating art, I do try and have that element of hope, because you don't want to just feel very depressed. So this piece is reflecting on something that was in the news. So sometimes it's nice to kind of create things that are relevant to what's happening in current affairs. So last year there was a piece that went out on BBC. It was kind of publicised by Rivers Trust and Wildlife Countryside Link. And it was looking at the fact that every single river in the UK, every single body of fresh water, failed the cleanliness thing. There was not a single one that wasn't polluted. And I was looking into this, and it's obviously horrific. And so I wanted to create a piece that was looking at one of our endangered river species, and something that lots of people don't know we have in the UK, which is freshwater mussels. And so this piece is a triptych, and it's basically tracking the increase in chemical pollution from left to right. So the left one is in no chemical pollution, and the right has significant chemical pollution. And there are tiny little bits of red, which is where I was trying to indicate that there is a level of fatality when we reach that level of chemical pollution. I should say that all of these pieces, I always accompany them with text, so a big part of what I do is, when you go to an art gallery, you do want to understand pieces, and because these are shown on social media, I always write little descriptions, and you don't have to read them, but they're the bits where I try and explain the pieces for people that are interested. So one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, and have been for a while, is light pollution, and particularly how it affects birds and moths and things. And so this is a piece that's looking at how moths are fatally attracted to anthropogenic lights. And the idea is that they're drawing away from the flowers and things that they should be pollinating to a lamp. And for things like this, I'm trying to use really basic colour schemes. So yellow for something that feels very human, for example. And sometimes it's nice to use negative space. So this is a huge piece, and I did the tiniest thing possible on it. And this was because, quite simply, I wanted to show that tigers are disappearing. This paw is in a hunting stance, so using different reference images, and it's a bit of not a pun, but I guess a self-aware sort of thing, because we are hunting them to extinction. And this is another one on me, which was a bit more recent. It's the first time I've incorporated objects. It was quite fun to do, but again, flamingos. No one really thinks about them as having threats that they're facing, but one of the biggest things is, again, things in their habitat, things that shouldn't be there, litter, pollution, plastic. And that's not just flamingos, it's other birds as well, but because flamingos are so charismatic, they're so colourful, and because Barbie came out last year and that was all pink, I thought it would be kind of nice to tie into that. So that's kind of the basis of that piece. So we've got two more, this one more. So this piece is a piece that is, I guess, a little bit less on the nose activism. It's also the piece that took the longest, which is why I wanted to include it. It's taken 45 hours, which for me is a very long time. This piece is just simply illustrating a habitat, because sometimes we don't consider the fact that there are environments that need protecting, not just animals. And so the fact that there's a little wildebeest in the middle, but you're mainly looking at the big savannah, that was the focus of that piece, because I really wanted you to look at the habitat. And finally, we've got probably my most well-known piece, which is also the oldest now. So this piece I did when I was 20, and it is looking at whales and noise pollution. So as I said before, cetaceans, they're mostly affected by noise pollution, and this was looking at how that kind of fragments their communication, which is why the whale has been disrupted into these noise polluted lines. But I also wanted it to have that positive interpretation if people wanted to, because obviously Wales are most well known for their beautiful song. And so some people, when they look at this piece, just see it for that positive interpretation, whereas others do see it for that negative one. And so I quite liked the ambiguity of that piece. So that's me, and I'm all of those places, and that's my art, so I